Hey guys, tonight we are taking a forced, unpleasant trip. We're diving deep into a historical survival scenario that is anything but glamorous. The brutal reality of exile for the Tuareg nomads in the unforgiving heart of the Sahara Desert. Imagine being stripped of your home, your livelihood, and forced to walk into an environment that actively tries to kill you every single second. This isn't some cozy camping trip or a weekend warrior adventure. This is existential dread under a relentless sun where every step you take could be your last, and frankly, you probably won't survive this without some serious, very specific knowledge. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know down in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Always cool to see where these sleepy survival stories reach. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk, that's it. That's the primary activity of your new life. Just putting one foot in front of the other across terrain that seems explicitly designed to inconvenience, injure, and eventually extinguish you. The sun is a malevolent eye in a sky of washed out blue, beating down with an intensity that feels personal. It's not just hot, it's an oppressive, suffocating heat that leaches the moisture from your body with alarming speed. Every pore feels open, sweating profusely, and yet, paradoxically, your mouth is already dry, your lips starting to crack. You lick them instinctively, only to taste the fine, gritty sand that the wind seems to carry on a mission to infiltrate every single bodily orifice and belonging you possess. Honestly, if sand had a mission statement, it would be, go forth and annoy. Your few remaining possessions are slung over a shoulder or carried in tired, aching hands. They aren't much. The bare necessities deemed unworthy of confiscation, or perhaps just overlooked in the chaos of departure. A worn blanket, a small, dented metal pot, maybe a single dull knife. Not exactly Bear Grylls level kid, is it? You eye the horizon with a growing sense of despair. Its shimmers distorting the distant heat haze into mirages that tease with the illusion of water or shade, only to dissolve into the same monotonous, undulating expanse of sand and rock. It's like the desert is playing psychological games with you, and honestly, you're too tired to play back. You just want a tall glass of ice water and maybe some air conditioning. Ah, modern comforts. Remember air conditioning? Yeah, that feels like a million years ago now. The air itself is thick, dry, and carries the constant irritating sting of airborne grit. You wrap a piece of cloth loosely around your face, trying to filter the worst of it, but the sand is insidious. It gets in your hair, under your clothes, between your teeth. Your eyes water constantly, not from emotion, but from the sheer physical abrasion of the particles. It's an omnipresent, infuriating irritant, like that one friend who always talks with their mouth full, but everywhere all the time. You just have to accept it. This is your life now, sandy and thirsty. Survival here isn't about heroics, it's about managing deficits. A deficit of water, a deficit of food, a deficit of shelter, a deficit of hope. Every step drains your limited energy reserves. Every drop of sweat is a tiny victory for the desert. You try to recall everything you've ever heard about surviving in arid environments. Stay calm, don't exert yourself unnecessarily. Ration water. But what water? You have a small goatskin bag, maybe a liter or two left, and you eye it like it's liquid gold, which out here, it literally is. Historians still argue whether the strict water rationing enforced during ancient desert migrations caused more deaths from heat stroke than it prevented from dehydration. A grim thought that does little to comfort you as you resist the urge to gulp down half your supply right now. You know the stories of those who came this way before, those exiled from their lands or fleeing conflict. Some made it, clinging to life by a thread. Many didn't. The desert keeps its secrets well, burying bones and broken dreams under shifting dunes. This landscape has witnessed countless struggles for existence. For instance, the famous march of Alexander the Great's army through the Gadrosian Desert after his Indian campaign resulted in catastrophic losses, primarily due to the harsh conditions. A stark historical fact that underscores just how deadly these environments can be, even for a well-provisioned military force. You, on the other hand, are just you, with a sad little sack of stuff. As dust begins to paint the sky in bruised oranges and purples, the heat doesn't magically vanish, but it softens its intensity. This brings a different challenge. The temperature can plummet surprisingly fast in the desert once the sun is gone. The heat radiated from the sand dissipates quickly into the clear night sky. You realize you'll need shelter somehow from the cold and the wind that often picks up after dark. The landscape offers little. A few scattered rocks, maybe a low scrubby bush every now and then. Nothing substantial enough to break the wind or offer real protection. Your worn blanket suddenly feels woefully inadequate. It's not just heat and thirst. It's the sheer exposed vulnerability to the elements, day and night. You understand now why tales of mythical desert creatures or vengeful spirits flourish in such places. The environment itself feels hostile, alive with threats both seen and unseen. There's a quirky fringe tidbit about some desert cultures believing the wind carries the voices of the dead, a notion that feels less like folklore and more like a plausible explanation for the eerie whispers you hear as the breeze begins to stir the sand around your ankles. It's probably just the wind, though. Probably. Let's hope it's just the wind. Finding even a marginally suitable spot to hunker down for the night feels like a major undertaking. You scan the fading light for any slight depression in the ground, any cluster of rocks, anything that might offer the slightest reprieve from the inevitable wind. Your body aches with exhaustion, muscles screaming in protest. You haven't seen another living soul for what feels like an eternity, save for maybe a distant hawk circling high above, probably wondering if you'll be dinner soon. The silence is profound, broken only by the scuff of your own feet, the whine of the wind, and the frantic beating of your own heart, which seems to be working overtime just to keep you upright. This isn't just a physical journey, it's a mental and emotional endurance test, a slow, grinding depletion of everything you are. And the night is coming. You need shelter. Soon. You keep scanning the ground as the last vestiges of light drain from the sky, that vibrant, bruised palette fading to an inky, star-strewn blackness. The stars, ironically, are stunningly clear out here with zero light pollution, like someone spilled a box of diamonds across velvet. Beautiful, yes, but also a stark reminder of how utterly exposed you are to the vast, indifferent cosmos. You eventually settle on a spot. It's not much, just a slight scoop in the sand between two low, rounded rocks. It offers maybe a foot of vertical protection from the wind, which is now starting to bite with real chill. It whips around the rocks, carrying that incessant sand, stinging your exposed skin. It feels less like a breeze and more like 1,000 tiny needles being thrown at you by an unseen assailant. You try to huddle down, pulling your thin blanket around your shoulders. It's about as effective against this wind as a wet paper towel is against a hurricane. Remember that fancy camping sleeping bag you used to have? The one rated for sub-zero temperatures? Yeah, you'd trade your left kidney for that right now. This blanket feels like it was knitted by a spider on a really bad day. You curl into a fetal position, trying to minimize your surface area exposed to the elements. The sand beneath you, which radiated warmth for a little while after sunset, is now quickly becoming cold. It leaches heat away from your body, making you shiver uncontrollably. The wind howls around the rocks, sometimes sounding like a mournful cry, sometimes like a sharp whistle right next to your ear. You try to block it out, burying your face in your arms, but it penetrates everything. It reminds you of those horror movies where the wind sounds like voices. You're pretty sure it's just the wind, but honestly, out here alone in the dark, you wouldn't be entirely surprised if it started whispering your name and telling you where you left your car keys. Sleep is a fractured, elusive thing. Every time you start to drift off, a fresh gust of wind whips sand into your face or chills you to the bone, jolting you awake. You lie there, tense and miserable, listening to the sounds of the desert night. Occasionally, there's a scuttling noise, a beetle, a scorpion. You don't want to think about it too much. You just hope whatever it is isn't looking for a warm place to hide inside your inadequate clothing. This isn't exactly the restful night's sleep recommended for optimal survival. In fact, this level of sleep deprivation combined with physical exhaustion and environmental stress is a fast track to making really, really bad decisions. Decisions like, maybe I should drink all my water right now because thirst is annoying. Bad idea, very bad idea. As the night wears on, the cold becomes more intense. You find yourself shivering even harder, your muscles tensing up. Your body is working overtime just to maintain core temperature, that small scoop of sand offered next to no protection. You realize with stark clarity that this is not sustainable. One night maybe, 2 nights like this, and you'll be seriously compromised. You need proper shelter. Not just a windbreak, but something that can contain your body heat, block the wind entirely, and keep the sand out. You need a tent, but not just any tent, a tent that can withstand the relentless, abrasive power of desert wind and the sudden temperature shifts. A tent specifically designed for this. You start thinking about the people who actually live out here, the nomads. The Tuareg, the blue men of the desert. They don't just lie shivering behind a rock. They have dwellings perfectly adapted to this brutal environment. Their traditional tents, the aka or ehan, aren't like the dome tents you'd take camping back home. They're designed differently, lower to the ground, using materials that provide insulation from both heat and cold, and crucially built to handle the wind. Historians still argue whether the specific low rectangular design of Tuareg tents evolved primarily for wind resistance or for ease of transport on camels. But either way, you need something with that kind of structural integrity and environmental resilience. Your flimsy nylon tent wouldn't last 5 minutes out here before being shredded or blown away like a tumbleweed. As the first hint of gray appears on the horizon, promising the return of the punishing sun, but also an end to the immediate bone-chilling cold, you are profoundly uncomfortable, stiff and exhausted. Every muscle aches, your eyes are gritty with sand, and you feel less rested than when you stopped walking. This night was a harsh lesson. Survival isn't just about finding water and food. It's fundamentally about managing your environment. And right now, the environment is winning. You need shelter, real shelter, and you need it fast. You also need to figure out how to build or find such a thing with literally nothing. It's a bit of a pickle, isn't it? It's like being tasked with building a high-tech computer, but only being given a rock and a dull spoon. Good luck. One famous historical example of just how critical shelter was in desert campaigns is the fate of the Roman army under Publius Quinctilius Varus at the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. Wait, wrong desert. Sorry, that was a forest ambush in Germany. A correct historical fact about desert survival and shelter would be the ingenuity of various Saharan groups, like the Bedouin and Tuareg, in developing shelters that were both portable for nomadic life and provided essential protection. For example, traditional tents often use animal skins or woven wool hair, providing a much better barrier against wind and temperature than flimsy modern fabrics might. This allowed them to survive in places where others would perish. You, however, are currently operating on the huddle behind a rock principle, which, spoiler alert, is not taught in any reputable survival manual. You slowly, painfully uncurl yourself from your makeshift sand cocoon. The wind is still blowing, but the light is growing stronger. The sand that collected against the windward side of your little rock formation is a testament to its relentless force. You brush yourself off, which just seems to move the sand around rather than remove it. Everything you own is coated in it. Your blanket, your clothes, your hair, it's everywhere. You take a small rationed sip from your water bag. It's warm and tastes vaguely of goat skin, but it's water. And for a moment, that's all that matters. You need a plan that involves not repeating the miserable experience of the last few hours. A plan that involves finding or creating shelter specifically designed to combat the twin evils of desert exposure. The wind and the sand, followed closely by the sun and the cold. You need to understand how the experts did it. The Tuareg knew. They had the answers etched into centuries of tradition. You just have to hope you can figure out what those answers were before you become another anonymous bump under a dune. Maybe there's a quirky fringe tidbit about ancient desert travelers leaving markers related to shelter locations. little cairns or symbols etched into rocks. Although finding one of those now feels about as likely as stumbling upon a fully stocked convenience store out here. Still, the thought persists. People survived this before. How, and can you replicate it? Replicate? You push yourself upright, every joint protesting, the grit of sand migrating into even more uncomfortable places. The first rays of sunlight are stretching across the dunes, painting them in hues of orange and gold, beautiful but also promising the return of intense heat after the biting cold of the night. The wind, while still present, hasn't yet reached its midday strength, but you know it will. You look back at your pathetic excuse for a shelter, a slight depression between two rocks. It's a monument to inadequacy. This experience has hammered home a fundamental truth. Surviving the desert isn't just about enduring thirst. It's about mastering the environment, and that starts with proper shelter. The thought of the Tuareg and their legendary tents is fixed in your mind. You need to understand their design principles. You need an aha, an ehan, whatever they call it, you need something like it. Your average camping tent, the kind you might pick up from a big box store, is designed for a different world. They're often tall, dome-shaped, or tunnel tents built for relatively stable ground and moderate weather. Out here, that vertical profile is a wind magnet. The relentless abrasive sand carried on that wind would find every zipper, every seam, every tiny gap, and work its way inside, turning your supposed sanctuary into a gritty hellhole in minutes. Plus, the lightweight nylon or polyester is great for portability, but terrible for insulation in extreme heat or cold. And frankly, probably wouldn't withstand the constant battering of sand and wind for long before starting to fray or tear. It's like trying to use a screen door as protection against a sandblaster. You're going to have a bad time, and probably a lot of tiny, painful sand tattoos. The traditional Tuareg tent, in contrast, is a masterclass in form following function in an extreme environment. Forget your dome. Think low, think rectangular, think anchored. These tents aren't tall and proud, they hug the ground. This immediately reduces the surface area exposed to the wind's direct force. The lower the profile, the less leverage the wind has to push against. It's pure physics, applied through generations of trial and error. The structure itself is simple, reflecting the need for portability in a nomadic lifestyle. Often it consists of a few central poles, possibly upright supports around the perimeter, in a framework of smaller sticks or branches. This framework supports the covering, which is the real key to environmental control. The covering material isn't lightweight synthetic fabric. Traditionally, it would be made from animal skins, goat skin or camel skin, perhaps, tanned and stitched together, or woven fabrics made from animal hair, like camel or goat hair. These materials offer significant advantages over modern nylon. Firstly, they are much heavier and more durable. The weight helps keep the tent grounded against wind, especially when the edges are properly anchored or weighted down. Secondly, and crucially, they are much more effective barriers against sand. The tightly woven hair or the dense leather doesn't let fine sand particles pass through in the way loose weave synthetics might. It's like the difference between trying to filter flour with a sieve versus a solid sheet of paper. Okay, maybe not solid, but you get the idea. Furthermore, these natural materials provide much better insulation than thin nylon. Skin and woven hair trap air within their fibers and structure, creating a thermal buffer. In the cold desert night, this helps retain body heat, making the inside of the tent noticeably warmer than the outside air. During the scorching day, the same material helps block the sun's intense radiant heat and keeps the interior cooler. It's a natural passive climate control system, perfectly suited to the wild temperature swings of the desert. You shivering behind that rock last night? That wouldn't happen in a properly constructed akka. You might still be a bit cool, but you wouldn't be fighting hypothermia with a spider knit blanket. Building or even just pitching one of these, however, isn't like popping up a modern tent with flexible poles. It requires specific knowledge, how to prepare and work with the materials, how to assemble the frame sturdy enough to withstand gusts that could tear lesser shelters apart, how to tension the covering correctly, and how to anchor it securely in shifting sand. Anchoring in sand is its own challenge. You can't just hammer a peg into solid ground. You need specialized anchors, like large stones, sandbags, if you had bags, or burying the edges of the fabric itself under piles of sand. It's a technique born of necessity. Historians still argue whether certain regional variations in Tuareg tent construction were primarily driven by the specific types of available animal skins or the prevalent wind patterns of the area. But the end result is always a low, resilient structure. Think about the sheer amount of force wind can exert, especially when it picks up speed across a flat, open landscape like the desert. It's not just a gentle push, it's a battering ram. A quirky tidbit is that some desert nomads would even position their tents in relation to expected wind direction, perhaps slightly angled or in the lee of a dune, not just for comfort, but as part of the structural strategy to reduce stress on the tent fabric and frame during a sandstorm. It's like advanced micro-positioning for survival points. Your sad little huddle spot definitely didn't take prevailing wind patterns into account. It barely accounted for your own presence. You realize that even if you miraculously found the materials out here, unlikely, to say the least, you wouldn't have the first clue how to put them together into something functional. You might end up with a pile of skins and sticks that collapses the first time a decent gust comes along. It's a humbling thought. Survival in these extreme environments isn't intuitive. It's a learned skill, passed down through generations, perfected over centuries. A mainstream historical fact demonstrating the importance of traditional shelter knowledge is the struggles faced by early European explorers and military forces in desert regions who often failed to adapt their standard equipment and tactics to the harsh conditions, leading to significant losses from exposure, heat stroke, and dehydration. Issues that local populations, with their knowledge of shelters like the Akha, had long ago mitigated. You stand there brushing sand off your clothes for the 100th time, feeling utterly inadequate. You understand why the Tuareg tent works in theory: low profile, durable materials, solid anchoring. But knowing the theory is a long way from having one, or knowing how to build one from scratch in the middle of nowhere with zero resources. It's like knowing the recipe for sourdough bread doesn't magically make you a baker with a perfect starter. You need the ingredients, the tools, and the practice. Right now, you have none of those things, and the sun is starting to climb higher, promising another day of relentless heat, followed by another night that you desperately hope won't be a repeat of the last. You need shelter, and you need to figure out how the Tuareg actually built these things, perhaps using found materials or simple, replicable methods you could potentially attempt. If only you had a handy Tuareg tent instruction manual with Desert Edition stamped on it. Probably wouldn't survive long enough to read it anyway. You're standing there mentally sifting through everything you've just realized about the Tuareg tent. It's not just a shape, it's a whole system, a product of deep environmental knowledge. Okay, so you don't have tanned goat hides or woven camel hair just lying around. Probably not even a decent length of sturdy stick that isn't brittle from the sun. But understanding how they build them, the principles behind the construction, might spark an idea, might show you how to adapt something, if you ever find anything resembling materials out here. It's about the method, not just the finished product you're currently envying from afar. Imagine for a moment you're learning from someone who knows, perhaps watching a Tuareg family set up camp. Or maybe you just stumbled across an ancient desert wiki page in your mind's eye. The process starts with the frame. Forget aluminum poles that slot together with elastic cords. This is organic, adaptable. The main supports are typically a few sturdy poles, often made from acacia wood or whatever is available locally and reasonably straight. These aren't massive logs. They're chosen for their strength to weight ratio, something you can transport. These central poles are the backbone. They're usually stood upright, maybe 2 or 3 depending on the size of the tent, supporting the main ridge. Then comes the lattice work, the skeleton. This is often made from smaller, more flexible branches or sticks. Think bundles of smaller pieces tied together, or longer, thinner poles forming the walls and roof structure. This framework isn't rigid and prefabricated. It's assembled on site, fitted together. They use natural cordage, perhaps made from palm fibers, animal sinew, or prepared strips of hide, to lash the sticks and poles together. It's a system that allows for slight variations in the materials found, and crucially, it can be taken apart and reassembled quickly. It's like building with nature's Legos, but way more splintery and requiring actual knots. You'd probably spend half the setup time just untangling your attempts at a square knot. Once the frame is up, low and wide as you now know it needs to be, comes the covering. This is the really interesting part, the part that provides the protection. As mentioned, traditionally this is animal skins or woven hair fabric. Let's think about the skins first. Goat skin or camel skin, because those are the animals resilient enough to survive this kind of landscape. The skins aren't just raw hides, they're treated, tanned. Tanning makes them durable, less prone to rot, and more flexible. The process itself would be complex, likely involving animal brains, plant tannins, and a whole lot of elbow grease, a skill you definitely didn't learn in scout camp. These treated skins are then carefully stitched together using strong fiber or sinew, creating large, relatively waterproof, or at least very sandproof, panels. The stitching would be incredibly tight to prevent sand ingress. The alternative covering, and perhaps more common in some areas due to availability or tradition, is woven fabric from animal hair, typically goat or camel hair. This isn't fine wool, it's coarser, stronger hair. It's spun into yarn and then woven into large, thick strips or panels. The weaving is done tightly, creating a dense fabric. This woven hair fabric has fantastic properties for the desert. It's incredibly durable against wind abrasion, much more so than plant fibers. It sheds sand remarkably well because of the texture and weave density. And as discussed, it's a great insulator. The natural oils and structure of the hair help repel water if there's a rare rain shower, and they provide that thermal buffer. It's a textile born of necessity, a truly ingenious use of readily available resources. Putting the covering onto the frame is another skill. The large panels are draped over the structure. The edges are then pulled taut and anchored securely to the ground. This tensioning is crucial. A loose tent cover flaps in the wind, creating stress points and allowing sand to funnel underneath. A tightly tensioned cover distributes the force of the wind more evenly across the material and the frame. The anchoring, as you already know, isn't simple tent pegs in sand. It involves burying the edges of the fabric under mounds of sand, using large stones, or employing specialized sand anchors, often flat pieces of wood or woven mats buried horizontally to provide resistance. It's like giving the tent feet that dig into the earth, or rather, the sand. A quirky tidbit is that the color of the traditional tent covering is often dark, typically brown or black. You might think, wouldn't a dark color absorb more heat? Well, yes, it does. However, a thicker, opaque dark material also completely blocks the sun's radiant energy. While the surface gets hot, the thickness and insulating properties of the material, combined with airflow underneath the slightly raised edges, sometimes intentionally allowed for ventilation, mean the inside can be surprisingly cooler than a thin, light-colored fabric that might let radiant heat pass through. It's a counterintuitive design that works in practice, like wearing black in the desert, which some cultures actually do. Seems wrong, but trust the experts, probably. Think about the maintenance involved too. These aren't set-it-and-forget-it structures. Animal skins can dry out and crack. Woven hair can fray. They need regular inspection, patching, and perhaps retreating. The poles and framework might need repair or replacement. It's an ongoing relationship with your shelter, not a transaction. It requires constant attention. You, meanwhile, are struggling to keep your socks free of sand. Different ballgame entirely. Historians still argue whether the primary driver for adopting woven hair over animal skins in certain Tuareg groups was related to herd composition, trading patterns, or perhaps simply the differing ease of transport and repair for nomadic movement. But both materials serve the same fundamental purpose, creating a resilient, low-profile barrier against the brutal desert environment. It's a mainstream historical fact that throughout history, successful nomadic cultures in harsh environments, from the Bedouin of the Middle East with their Beit al-Sha'ar, House of Hair, tents, to the Mongols with their yurts, develop highly sophisticated and transportable shelter technologies using local natural materials. demonstrating a universal principle of adapting design to environment and available resources. The ability to quickly dismantle, transport, and reassemble this complex but ultimately intuitive structure is part of the genius. A family can pack up their entire home and move to a new pasture or water source. You, on the other hand, are struggling to repack your very modern backpack without getting sand in your peanut butter. It underscores just how specialized traditional knowledge is for survival in these landscapes. You could watch a time-lapse of a Tuareg family setting up their tent, and it would look incredibly efficient, almost choreographed. Your own attempts at shelter last night looked less like choreography and more like a small, confused animal trying to burrow under a leaf. So you now have a clearer picture of the how. Frame from available wood, covering from treated skins or woven hair, low profile, securely anchored, built for portability and resilience against sand and wind. It's a piece of living history, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of extreme conditions. Knowing this doesn't magically make a tent appear, but it reinforces the gap between your current vulnerability and the mastery required to survive here. You're learning slowly, painfully, one gritty grain of sand at a time, and the sun is getting higher. Time to figure out the next mistake you're going to make. Okay, so you've got the image of the frame, the covering, the low profile anchored into the sand. You understand the how of building it. Now the real magic trick, the part that makes these shelters more than just a flimsy barrier against the elements. How do they manage to be survivable inside when it's an absolute furnace outside, especially with that dark, thick covering? It seems counterintuitive, right? You're sweating just standing here, radiating heat like a forgotten baked potato, and yet you imagine stepping into one of those tents and finding not exactly air conditioning, but a distinct, blessed relief. How? It's all about passive design, a deep understanding of physics without needing a degree in thermodynamics. The first crucial element is the insulation provided by the materials themselves. Those thick layers of woven animal hair or treated skins, they're not just blocking the wind and sand, they're creating a thermal barrier. Think of it like wearing a really thick coat in winter. It traps heat in, in the desert, a thick layer works both ways. It keeps the heat out. The radiant heat from the sun hitting the dark surface is largely prevented from passing through the material. The surface gets hot, yes, potentially scorching to the touch, but that heat dissipates into the air outside and through the material itself rather than instantly warming the air inside. It's the difference between standing in direct sun, radiant heat frying you, and standing in thick shade, radiant heat blocked. But insulation alone isn't enough. So a sealed box, even a well-insulated one, would eventually just get hot from the heat trapped within it and the heat generated by anything inside himself, like you exhaling warmth and despair. The second key element is ventilation. And this is where the low profile and the construction details really shine. While the tent needs to be anchored securely against sand and wind, it's not hermetically sealed. There are often subtle gaps, particularly around the base where the covering meets the ground anchoring. These aren't mistakes. They are deliberate or inherent features of the design that allow for crucial airflow. Imagine the wind skimming across the low, curved profile of the tent. This creates a pressure difference. Lower pressure over the curved top, higher pressure on the windward side. Air is naturally drawn into the tent through gaps on the windward side, where pressure is higher, and exits through gaps or openings on the leeward side, where pressure is lower, or even through small porous areas of the fabric or seams. This gentle, constant flow of air is like a natural convection system, slowly but surely moving the warmer air inside the tent and out, and drawing slightly cooler air from the shaded ground around the edges in. It's not a blast of air, but a constant, subtle exchange. It's the desert's version of opening windows on opposite sides of a house, but done with wind pressure and clever design. You, meanwhile, are fanning yourself with a wilting leaf, achieving approximately zero airflow and attracting flies. A quirky tidbit is that the entrance of the tent is often strategically placed, not just for convenience, but also potentially to optimize this natural ventilation or to avoid the prevailing wind blowing directly into the main living space, which would fill it with sand. The orientation might vary slightly depending on the specific location and time of year, showing a deep observational knowledge of local microclimates and wind patterns. It's not just stick the door anywhere. It's a thought-out decision based on generations of accumulated wisdom. You'd probably just face it away from the sun, which might work sometimes, but you'd miss the subtle wind dynamics entirely. Then there's the effect of mass. The sand itself, particularly the cooler layers just below the surface, acts as a thermal sink. The tense low profile and potential slight gaps at the base keep the occupied space close to the relatively cooler ground. It's like having natural geothermal cooling, but instead of hot springs, it's just regular coolish sand. This, combined with the airflow, helps maintain a temperature gradient between the scorching outside and the relatively more comfortable inside. Well, it's still going to be warm by your air-conditioned standards, but potentially 10, 15, or even 20 degrees Celsius cooler than the ambient air temperature in direct sun. A definite win. Historians still argue whether the primary cooling mechanism in these tents is the insulating property of the material effectively blocking radiant heat, or the subtle, passive airflow creating convective cooling. But it's likely a combination of both working in concert with the shade and ground temperature. It's a mainstream historical fact that indigenous peoples in hot, arid climates worldwide, facing similar challenges, developed architectural solutions prioritizing natural ventilation, insulation from intense solar radiation, and thermal mass effects, long before modern HVAC systems were conceived. Examples range from adobe structures with thick walls and small windows to courtyard houses and indeed tension-based fabric structures like the Tuareg tents. Consider also the interior environment. Inside, away from the harsh sun, the air movement is gentle. The thick fabric also dampens the sound of the wind outside, creating a sense of calm and enclosure, which paradoxically makes the relative coolness feel even more pronounced. There might be internal hangings or dividers made of lighter fabric, which can help control airflow within the space and provide privacy without impeding the overall ventilation strategy. It's a multi-layered approach, each component playing its part. Trying to achieve this effect with a flimsy plastic tarp and some sticks would be hilarious, frankly. The tarp would just heat up like a plastic bag in a microwave. Don't try that at home or anywhere. And the wind would probably just rip it to shreds anyway. So the secret isn't complex machinery or exotic materials you can't find. It's smart design principles applied to available resources. Thick insulating material, a low wind skimming profile, strategic gaps for passive airflow, and leveraging the thermal properties of the ground. It's elegant in its simplicity and devastatingly effective in its context. It represents a level of environmental attunement that feels almost alien in your current predicament, where your main survival strategy involves trying to squint less against the sun. Understanding this ventilation and cooling mechanism gives you another piece of the puzzle. If you ever do find some kind of fabric or sheeting, you know you need enough thickness for insulation, and you need to consider how to create controlled airflow, not a drafty mess. You need to think about how to anchor it low to the ground and perhaps even leverage the ground's relative coolness. It's a lot to process, and the heat is making your brain feel like a slow cooker. But these lessons are sticking, gritty, and uncomfortable, just like everything else here. Stepping inside that low, dark opening is like entering a different world, a quiet, shaded pocket carved out of the raging inferno outside. Remember how we talked about the cooling effect? You feel it immediately. The air is still warm, yes, probably still hotter than your ideal temperature, but it's a dry, settled warmth, devoid of the sun's direct, aggressive assault. It's muted, calm. Your eyes adjust to the dimness after the glare, seeing the simple reality of survival laid bare. The floor is the ground, often covered with woven mats or animal skins for comfort, or sometimes just the packed sand itself. The ceiling is low, often forcing you to stoop slightly if you're taller than average, reinforcing that sense of being grounded, literally and figuratively. The light inside is diffuse, filtering faintly through the thick fabric, creating soft shadows. It feels basic, utterly, fundamentally basic. No fancy fixtures, no clever storage solutions you saw on Pinterest. Just essential items, few in number, carefully placed. Possessions here are measured not by quantity, but by necessity and portability. Imagine trying to pack your entire apartment, or even just your overloaded camping gear into this space and then having to move it all every few weeks. Not happening. So inside the tent, you'd find woven baskets containing dried food or personal items, clay pots for cooking, and water, perhaps simple wooden bowls or metal cups. There might be a small, low table or a block of wood used for preparing food or crafting. Sleeping areas are just that. Designated spots on the mats or skins, perhaps with simple blankets or wraps used as bedding. Everything serves multiple purposes or is easily repaired or replaced. There's no room for sentimentality towards clutter. Your entire life's worth of stuff currently feels like a comical liability in this scenario. You'd trade your entire vintage vinyl collection for a single sturdy water skin right about now. The space within the tent is often implicitly divided, not by walls, but by use and sometimes by social custom. There might be an area near the entrance for receiving guests or handling certain tasks, a main sleeping area, and a place for storing cooking gear. Perhaps closer to an opening used for ventilation when cooking indoors, or more often, cooking happens just outside. While these divisions are fluid, they lend a quiet structure to life within. Historians still argue whether the spatial arrangement within these tents primarily reflects practical needs or underlying social hierarchies. But it's clear that every square inch is utilized with intent. For a nomadic people whose survival depends on efficiency, wasted space or unnecessary items are luxuries they simply can't afford. You, on the other hand, probably have a drawer full of random cables and chargers you haven't touched in years. Daily life inside is dictated by the external environment and the needs of the group. During the scorching heat of the day, the tent becomes a sanctuary for rest and quiet activity. This is when people might repair tools, weave mats, prepare food for the cooler evening, or simply rest and converse in low tones. The rhythm is slow, deliberate. As the sun sets and temperatures drop, activity shifts outwards again for cooking, gathering, and enjoying the relative coolness of the desert night. But the tent remains the central hub, the place of retreat and safety. It's not a place for loud parties or elaborate entertainment. It's the shelter, the home base. Your concept of cabin fever feels hilariously out of place here. This is just living. A quirky tidbit about Tuareg life inside the tent is the significance of certain objects and customs. For instance, the preparation and serving of tea is a central ritual, often performed by the men, requiring specific small glasses and teapots, always done with a certain flourish and offered to guests as a sign of hospitality. This simple act, requiring minimal items, becomes a focal point of social interaction within the confined space, transforming the basic interior into a place of culture and connection. It's not just a drink, it's a ceremony, repeated multiple times a day. Trying to replicate that with a rusty canteen and some questionable instant powder would be an affront to tradition, frankly. Another key element is the ubiquitous tagelmust, the cloth wrapped around the head and face, traditionally worn by Tuareg men. While essential outside for protection from sun, wind, and sand, it is often worn even inside the tent. It serves social purposes, indicating status and respect, but also practical ones, like providing a bit of shade if sitting near an entrance or simply being cumbersome to constantly remove and rewrap. It's a constant visual reminder of their unique identity and the environment they inhabit, even in the relative peace of their temporary home. The lack of material possessions might seem restrictive, but it forces a focus on intangible things: conversation, storytelling, shared tasks, and simply being together. Boredom, as you might understand it, isn't necessarily a negative here. It's a state of rest, a time for quiet reflection or gentle interaction, a stark contrast to the constant stimulation of modern life. There's no Netflix queue to scroll, no social media to endlessly refresh, just the quiet hum of life, the shifting shadows, the knowledge of the vast, empty world outside. It's boring, yes, but it's a deeply practical, energy-conserving boringness. You could certainly get used to this kind of boring if it meant not getting cooked alive outside. Thinking about this limited, purposeful life inside the tent gives you perspective. Survival isn't about having everything. It's about having enough of the right things and knowing how to use them, how to maintain them, and how to move them. It's about adaptability, efficiency, and understanding the constraints of your environment. The tent isn't a luxury, it's a carefully designed tool, and the life lived inside is a testament to human resilience and ingenuity in making a home in one of the harshest places on Earth. So you're inside the tent now, feeling that initial rush of relief, that moment where the oppressive glare and searing wind abate just slightly. But how is this fragile bubble of relative calm actually maintained? It's not magic, of course. It's a deep, intuitive understanding of physics and environmental management born out of centuries of necessity, practiced long before anyone coined terms like thermodynamics or airflow dynamics. The primary defense against the external furnace is the tent material itself. Remember how we talked about it being made of thick, woven fabric, often dark in color? This isn't some flimsy nylon sheet like your average camping tent. This is heavy stuff designed to absorb and block radiation, not just offer a token barrier. The density of the weave, sometimes reinforced with animal skins, acts as an effective insulator against both the intense solar radiation hitting the roof and walls and the conductive heat rising from the blisteringly hot ground. Think of it like wearing layers in the cold, but in reverse. The layers trap air and slow down heat transfer. It's remarkably effective at keeping the peak temperatures inside significantly lower than the surface temperature outside, which can easily reach 70 degrees, 150 degrees, or more on the sand. But insulation alone isn't enough, especially when you have bodies inside generating heat and the air itself is warm. This is where ventilation becomes key, and it's a subtle art. The tent isn't a sealed box. Strategic openings are crucial. The main entrance can be adjusted, partially opened, covered with a lighter cloth, or left open depending on the wind and sand conditions. More importantly, the lower edges of the tent can often be lifted slightly off the ground using small props or poles. This allows cooler, denser air, which tends to settle closer to the ground even if it's still warm, to enter at the bottom, while warmer, lighter air rises and is pushed out through the top vents or gaps. This creates a gentle, convective current that helps circulate the air and prevent it from becoming stagnant and stuffy inside. It's passive cooling at its finest, working with nature, not against it. Trying to replicate this with a battery-powered fan you forgot to charge would be a frustrating exercise in modern futility. Managing air quality is equally critical. The desert is inherently dusty and prone to sandstorms. While the tent fabric helps filter some of this, particularly when it's taut and the edges are secured, sand is incredibly pervasive. Inside, mats woven from palm fibers or other available materials are essential. They provide a cleaner surface to sit and sleep on than the bare sand, and they can be relatively easily rolled up and shaken out outside. Regular sweeping, though the concept of sweeping sand with limited tools is slightly comical, and careful management of openings during high winds are constant efforts. People also maintain personal cleanliness as much as possible with limited water, as body odor can quickly make a confined space unpleasant. It requires a level of discipline and awareness you probably only associate with trying not to offend your seatmate on a long-haul flight. Internal heat sources are minimized. Cooking, as mentioned before, is usually done outside the tent, especially during the day, to avoid adding heat and smoke to the interior. Any heating needed during cold desert nights, which can happen, remember, is carefully managed, perhaps with a small fire or hot stones placed safely. But the primary source of warmth then becomes blankets, body heat, and staying close together. It's a stark reminder that every action inside has an immediate impact on the confined environment. Comfort in the Tuareg tent isn't about plush sofas or climate control. It's about making the best of the available materials and understanding posture and position. Mats and skins soften the ground. Simple blankets provide warmth when needed. People sit or recline on the mats using rolled-up blankets or cushions as backrests. The low height of the tent encourages sitting or crouching rather than standing, which can feel awkward initially, but it keeps you within the cooler layer of air closer to the ground and minimizes disruption to the internal airflow. Historians still argue whether the traditional low-seating arrangements are purely practical for tent life, or also carry deeper social or ritualistic significance. But from a survival perspective, they make perfect sense. A fascinating historical fact is that variations of these tent structures, using readily available materials and passive ventilation techniques, have been employed by nomadic groups across different hot, arid regions for millennia, from the Bedouin of the Middle East to various tribes in the Horn of Africa. While materials and specific designs vary, the fundamental principles of using thick fabric for insulation and controlled airflow for cooling remain constant, a testament to the effectiveness of these age-old survival strategies. Your modern air conditioner, while certainly more powerful, is just a high-tech brute force solution compared to this elegant, low-resource approach. A quirky tidbit related to comfort and internal environment is the use of incense or fragrant woods. Despite the scarcity of resources, some Tuareg families traditionally burn small amounts of specific woods or resins inside the tent, not just for scent, but also potentially to ward off insects or simply create a more pleasant atmosphere within the close quarters. It's a small touch of sensory comfort in a challenging environment, a reminder that survival isn't only about the bare minimum, but also about maintaining a sense of humanity and well-being whenever possible. Imagine trying to purify your air with a strategically placed pine tree car air freshener in these conditions. It wouldn't quite cut it. Ultimately, managing the internal conditions of the sandwind tent is a constant, active process. It requires awareness of the external environment, the angle of the sun, the direction and strength of the wind, the presence of sand, and adjusting the tent's openings and configuration accordingly. It's a subtle, ongoing negotiation with the elements. The tent provides the structure, but human knowledge and effort maintain the habitable space within. It's not about creating an artificial paradise, but about carving out a functional, relatively comfortable pocket of existence in the face of overwhelming environmental hostility. You're not escaping the desert. You're learning to live with it, even when you're inside your temporary home. And that in itself is a profound survival lesson. Okay, so you've found shelter inside the tent, mitigating the immediate sting of the sun and wind, carving out that fragile pocket of relative calm we just talked about. But the tent, however cleverly designed, is just structure. It doesn't conjure resources out of thin air. The most brutal realities of desert survival manifest starkly within these canvas walls. The gnawing presence of thirst and hunger, and the constant, meticulous management of the precious few supplies you possess. There's no fridge here, no pantry to raid when you feel peckish, just what you carried in, and what little you might have managed to gather or hunt recently. Water is, of course, the absolute priority. Every Tuareg nomad understands this with an ancient, cellular certainty. You carry it in animal skins, traditionally goatskin bags, supple and tough, tied off securely at the neck. You might also have some water in sturdy gourds, or perhaps a few modern plastic containers, if you've had recent contact with the outside world. Though those come with their own problems like becoming brittle in the sun. The water inside these containers is never cool. It's perpetually lukewarm, sometimes even hot, tasting faintly of the skin or plastic that holds it. And there isn't much of it. Every drop is accounted for, every sip is deliberate. There is no casual drinking. Thirst is a constant companion, a low-grade hum beneath your consciousness that spikes whenever you exert yourself or the heat becomes particularly oppressive. Rationing isn't a suggestion, it's a non-negotiable law. A small amount is portioned out at set times, perhaps just a few mouthfuls, enough to wet your lips and throat, but rarely enough to truly quench the deep-seated need. You learn to drink slowly, letting the liquid linger, trying to trick your body into feeling satisfied. It's a lesson in discipline your morning coffee routine could never replicate. Food is the other side of this coin, slightly less immediate than water, but just as critical for long-term survival. The desert offers incredibly little in terms of readily available sustenance in most areas Tuareg traverse, especially in the deep Sahara. Your diet inside the tent relies heavily on non-perishable staples. Dates, dried and pressed, are gold. They are calorie-dense, relatively easy to transport, and last a long time. You might have bags of dried millet or sorghum, grains that can be ground into a rough flour or cooked into a simple porridge. If your family maintains camels or goats, you might have dried cheese or cured meat, but fresh animal products are rare and consumed quickly. Foraging is minimal, perhaps the occasional edible root or berry if you know exactly what you're looking for and are lucky enough to find it, but this isn't a reliable source of daily calories. Your survival here hinges on what you brought and your ability to make it last. Storing these items inside the tent is a challenge. Everything must be kept off the sand to prevent dampness and contamination. Woven mats and elevated platforms or bags are used. Food supplies are carefully wrapped or stored in containers to protect them from insects, ants, beetles, and other persistent desert critters that seem to appear from nowhere. Rodents are another threat. A small mouse or rat can decimate a precious supply of grain overnight. Vigilance is key. You learn to listen for the tiny rustling sounds that could indicate an unwelcome guest. It's a constant, low-level stressor, knowing that a single lapse in security could compromise your ability to survive. Keeping things cool is impossible, so spoilage of anything remotely perishable is a perpetual risk. This is why the diet leans so heavily on dried and preserved foods. Trying to keep a salad crisp in this heat would be like trying to teach a camel calculus. Utterly pointless and guaranteed to end in disappointment. When it's time to eat, the meals are simple, functional, and strictly portioned. Millet porridge cooked outside over a small fire, remember, cooking inside generates too much heat and smoke, might be brought in, served in small bowls. Dried dates are eaten one by one, savored slowly. There are no elaborate dishes, no seconds, certainly no dessert. Each meal is a necessary refueling, not a culinary experience. You eat sitting on the mats, perhaps sharing a communal bowl, reinforcing the shared fate of the group. The act of eating is often quiet, focused. Hunger, like thirst, is ever present, pushed back temporarily after a meal, but never truly banished when supplies are finite. Essential tools for food preparation and consumption within the tent are basic. A small mortar and pestle for grinding grain if needed, wooden or metal bowls, often treasured possessions, perhaps simple wooden spoons. You don't need a full cutlery set or specialized gadgets. Functionality rules. Cleaning these items, again with limited water, requires resourcefulness. Sand is sometimes used as an abrasive cleaner before a final minimal rinse with water. Historians still argue whether the stringent rationing practices observed in historical Tuareg camps were primarily driven by absolute scarcity or also reinforced by social structures and shared communal discipline. But regardless of the precise balance, the outcome was a culture of extreme frugality. A fascinating historical fact is the historical reliance of Tuareg and other Saharan nomads on the date palm. Dates weren't just food, the trees provided shade, fiber for ropes and weaving, and the palm heart was sometimes eaten. Oases where date palms grew were crucial hubs, dictating migration routes and trading patterns. This single plant offered a remarkable range of resources essential for survival in one of the world's harshest environments, highlighting the importance of deep ecological knowledge. A quirky or fringe tidbit about food management inside the tent involves the concept of desert stomach. Nomads develop a tolerance for food and water that might upset someone unaccustomed to it. Warm water, gritty flour, dried foods. But even they must be careful about contaminated supplies or unfamiliar plants. There's a specific traditional knowledge about which desert plants are safe and which are not, a knowledge passed down through generations, often accompanied by rituals or stories, blurring the lines between practical survival and cultural lore. It's not exactly don't eat the yellow snow, but similar principles apply, just with sand and thorny bushes. The tent becomes a microcosm of your resources. Every movement, every action, every consumption of food or water is measured against the finite supply. You live with the constant awareness of dwindling stocks, the hope of reaching the next oasis or meeting point, the fear of being caught short. It requires mental fortitude as much as physical endurance. This isn't just about surviving the environment. It's about surviving the logistics of living within that environment, managing your internal larder with unwavering discipline. It's a level of resource management that makes your budgeting app look positively frivolous. As the harsh, blinding glare of the sun begins its slow, reluctant descent towards the horizon outside your temporary canvas sanctuary, a different kind of discomfort starts to assert itself. The relentless heat that pounded down mercilessly all day, that radiated off the sand and seemed to store itself in the very air within the tent, starts to dissipate with unnerving speed. It's counterintuitive after surviving hours of oppressive warmth, but the desert doesn't just do extremes. It does rapid, dramatic shifts between them. You went from feeling like you were being slow-cooked in a canvas oven to suddenly noticing a chill creeping in. The sand outside, which moments ago felt like walking on hot coals, cools surprisingly quickly as the sun's rays lose their direct intensity. And with no atmospheric moisture, the thick, insulating blanket that keeps temperatures relatively stable in more humid climates, to hold the heat in, it just bleeds away into the vast, clear, star-pricked sky. Inside the tent, this means the air you were just moments ago struggling to breathe without feeling like you were inhaling fire now carries a distinct nip. The feeling is like stepping out of a sauna straight into a walk-in freezer, only less refreshing and much more prolonged. Your skin, damp from the day's sweat, now feels clammy and cold. You start to shiver. At first, it's just a subtle tremor, a little ripple across your skin. But as the minutes tick by and the sky outside deepens from orange and pink to the deep, inky blue of twilight, the shivers become more pronounced. Your muscles tense up, trying to generate heat. You might cross your arms tightly across your chest, hunch your shoulders, and draw your knees up. This is the flip side of desert survival. The bone-chilling cold that descends the moment the sun vanishes. That ingenious tent structure that offered a vital barrier against the sun and wind does little to trap radiant heat. It's a shield, not an insulator. The thin fabric, however cleverly woven, offers minimal thermal resistance. Your body, which has been fighting against overheating all day, now has to switch gears dramatically. Metabolism might slow slightly to conserve energy. You might find yourself instinctively seeking physical closeness with others inside the tent, huddling together for shared warmth. It's a primitive, fundamental human response, something your ancestors knew intimately long before central heating was even a glimmer in anyone's eye. You might find yourself regretting every single drop of water you use for anything other than drinking, because staying hydrated also helps regulate body temperature, and right now your body is screaming for warmth. It's like your internal thermostat is having a full-blown identity crisis. Layering is key, just as it was in the heat, but now the layers are there to trap warmth rather than block sun. Traditional Tuareg clothing, like the flowing bubu robes, are surprisingly effective for both extremes. Made often from cotton or linen, they provide ventilation during the day, but can be wrapped tightly to offer some insulation at night. Wool, if available, is prized for its warmth even when damp, though you hope you aren't damp inside the tent at night unless it's from a rare rain shower, which brings its own set of problems. You might wrap yourself in woven blankets made from camel hair or wool, or perhaps old animal skins if you have them. These blankets are not soft and fluffy like the ones you might have at home. They are rough, heavy, and practical, designed purely for function. Sleeping mats, like the woven ones mentioned before, help to provide a slight barrier between you and the cold sand floor, which otherwise acts as a relentless heat sink, drawing warmth directly out of your body. The cold isn't just a physical discomfort, it's a psychological one too. After the intensity of the day, the sudden chill can feel particularly draining. It requires a different kind of endurance, patience, stillness, and the ability to tolerate discomfort without complaint. Getting a good night's sleep becomes a challenge. You might shiver uncontrollably for a while, finding it hard to relax your muscles. Every tiny movement seems to expose a new patch of skin to the biting air. You curl into a tighter ball, trying to minimize your surface area. It's a far cry from kicking off the covers because your foot got too warm. While fire is essential for cooking, done outside the tent, remember, to avoid smoke and excess heat inside, and provides a vital source of warmth in a general camp, maintaining a fire. Inside the tent is generally impractical and dangerous. Smoke inhalation is a real risk in a confined space, and the risk of accidentally setting the tent ablaze is simply too high. So the warmth inside must come from within the group and from the limited coverings you possess. You might warm your hands over a small, dying ember outside before retreating inside, trying to carry that fleeting warmth with you. Historians still argue whether the timing of nomadic movements was primarily dictated by the availability of water and pasture, or if the need to avoid the extreme temperature fluctuations of the deep desert also played a significant role, pushing groups to travel more during milder seasons or transition periods. It's a complex interplay of resources and environmental tolerance. A fascinating historical fact is the traditional Tuareg use of indigo dye, particularly for their veils and robes. This dye didn't just serve an aesthetic purpose, it also offered some protection from the sun during the day, and perhaps more importantly in the context of night. The dye tended to rub off onto the skin over time, giving it a bluish tint. This blue skin was not just a cultural marker, but was believed by some to offer a slight barrier against the elements, though its primary benefit was likely psychological or status-related, rather than significant physical insulation against the cold. Still, having blue skin is way cooler than just being pale and shivering. A quirky or fringe tidbit about coping with the cold inside the tent involves sleeping arrangements. Families and close groups would sleep huddled together not just for warmth, but also for a sense of security against the vast emptiness and potential dangers of the desert night. Children would typically be placed in the center, surrounded by adults, maximizing shared body heat and protection. It's a human nesting instinct elevated to a survival strategy. You're basically a human heat pack for the smaller members of the group. The sounds of the night are different from the day too. The relentless hum of the wind might die down or pick up in unpredictable gusts that make the tent fabric snap sharply. You might hear the distant, haunting call of an animal adapted to the cold night or the soft rustle of something moving just outside. But mostly there is a profound, overwhelming silence amplified by the cold. It's a silence that can feel both peaceful and incredibly isolating. The stars outside, remember, are now impossibly bright and numerous in the clear, cold air. A dazzling display that serves as a beautiful but stark reminder of your tiny, vulnerable place in the universe. Your tent, your fragile bubble of warmth, feels even smaller under that immense cold sky. Getting through the night requires patience and resignation. There's no magic trick to conjure warmth. You make do with what you have, layer everything possible, huddle close if others are there, and try to find a position that minimizes contact with the cold ground and maximizes conservation of your own body heat. You might drift in and out of a fitful sleep, woken by shivers or the sudden flapping of the tent fabric in a gust of wind. It's not the deep, restorative sleep you crave, but it's enough to survive until the first hint of dawn when the cycle begins again. The struggle against the cold is just as demanding in its own way as the struggle against the heat. Your body is a battleground for temperature regulation 24/7. It's like constantly being asked to run a marathon in both extreme heat and extreme cold without any training, just because. After the physical battle with the cold, as your shivering subsides into a dull ache and you manage to huddle down within your meager coverings, the desert night settles into a different kind of intensity. It's no longer about the aggressive extremes of temperature, but about sound, or rather the lack of it, punctuated by unexpected moments of noise. The wind might have dropped completely, leaving a profound, almost unnerving silence. Or perhaps, just as you start to relax, a sudden gust will snatch at the tent fabric, making it snap and billow like a sail in a storm, startling you awake again. These sudden bursts of sound in an otherwise silent world are jarring. They make you acutely aware of the thin barrier separating you from the vast, unpredictable desert outside. The sand, which was a noisy companion during the day with its constant shifting and whispering in the wind, seems to absorb sound now that it's cold and still. You might hear the softest scrabbling of a creature just outside the tent. A desert mouse, a beetle, something you can't quite identify in the darkness. These tiny sounds are amplified by the silence, your ears straining to interpret them, trying to discern if they are a threat or just the normal, quiet life of the desert that carries on while you try to sleep. Sometimes the only consistent sound is your own breathing, or the rhythmic breathing of anyone else sharing the tent with you. a comforting anchor in the immense quiet. But if you peek outside, or if there's a gap in the tent where you can look up, the true spectacle of the desert night reveals itself. If you've only ever seen stars from a city or even a rural area with light pollution, you simply have no idea what you're missing. Here, in the deep desert, far from any artificial light source, the night sky is an overwhelming, breathtaking panorama. It's not just stars, it's a solid blanket of them, so thick and numerous that the blackness of space almost seems secondary. They don't just twinkle, they blaze with a steady, intense light. It looks less like individual pinpricks and more like someone took a paintbrush loaded with luminous paint and swiped it across the heavens. It's honestly ridiculous how many stars there are. You might feel a little silly looking at them, wondering if you're accidentally gazing into a galaxy far, far away that you only saw in movie theaters as a kid. And then there's the Milky Way. In places with light pollution, it's a faint smudge, maybe barely visible on a clear night. Here, it's a vibrant, glowing river of light stretching across the entire sky. You can see the dust lanes, the brighter knots of stars, the structure of our own galaxy laid out before you like a cosmic map. It's so bright it can actually cast a faint shadow on the ground if there's no moon. This isn't just a pretty sight. For people navigating by the stars, it's a fundamental reference point, a giant celestial highway in the sky. This brings us to a critical survival skill in the open desert night: celestial navigation. Without landmarks, without roads, how do you know which way is north or south or where you're headed? The answer for millennia has been the stars. In the northern hemisphere, which includes the Sahara, the most important star for navigation is Polaris, the North Star. It's not the brightest star in the sky, that's Sirius, the dog star, which you'll also see looking spectacularly bright, but it has a unique property. It sits almost directly above the Earth's North Pole. This means that as the Earth rotates, all the other stars appear to wheel around Polaris. But Polaris itself stays fixed in the northern sky. Find Polaris and you know where north is. It's like having a compass needle permanently glued to the sky. You just need to find it, usually by locating the Big Dipper constellation, whose two end stars point directly towards Polaris. Easy peasy, unless you slept through that part of scouting or astronomy class, in which case, good luck. Maybe follow the brightest one and hope it leads to a Starbucks. Traditional navigators, like the Tuareg, developed incredibly sophisticated knowledge of the night sky. They didn't just use Polaris. They knew the patterns of numerous constellations, their positions throughout the night and across the seasons. They could use these celestial patterns like a clock to estimate the time of night, and like a calendar to determine the time of year. Knowing which star or constellation is rising or setting in at a particular time tells you a lot about your orientation in the passage of time. It's a different kind of timekeeping than glancing at your phone, isn't it? More universal, slightly less prone to battery failure. Historians still argue whether specific methods of celestial navigation were developed independently by various nomadic groups, or if there was a significant exchange of astronomical knowledge across different cultures traversing similar trade routes. The routes themselves, after all, were often followed at night during the cooler temperatures, making stellar navigation absolutely essential. A fascinating historical fact related to celestial navigation in the desert is the development of astrolabes by medieval Islamic astronomers. While not exclusively a desert tool, these complex instruments allowed navigators and astronomers to measure the altitude of celestial bodies, determine local time, and even calculate latitude. The detailed star charts and astronomical tables compiled by scholars in centers like Baghdad and Timbuktu were invaluable for anyone traveling vast distances, including across the Sahara. Imagine trying to build one of those out of camel dung and spare tent poles. Probably not going to work. A quirky or fringe tidbit about the desert night sky involves the phenomenon of air glow. While much fainter than auroras, which you wouldn't typically see this far south, air glow is a faint emission of light by a planet's atmosphere. It's caused by various processes, such as cosmic rays striking the upper atmosphere or chemical reactions like the recombination of oxygen and nitrogen atoms dissociated by sunlight during the day. In the deep, dark desert with zero light pollution, This faint glow from the atmosphere itself can sometimes be subtly visible, adding to the ethereal quality of the night sky, a faint luminescence across the horizon that isn't moonlight or starlight, but the planet itself subtly glowing. It's like Earth is wearing a faint, spooky halo. Looking out at that immense star-filled sky from the confines of your small tent is a powerful experience. It simultaneously emphasizes how small and vulnerable you are, a tiny speck under a vast and different cosmos, and how connected you are to something ancient and profound. Every culture throughout human history has looked up at those same stars, told stories about them, used them to find their way. You are participating in that ancient tradition, whether you like it or not, simply by being here, under this unbelievable sky, trying not to freeze your toes off. The sounds you don't hear, the distant hum of traffic, the drone of airplanes, the urban buzz, make the silence feel even deeper. The only non-natural sounds might be the creak of your makeshift bed, the rustle of your clothes, the soft sounds of other people in the tent. Your immediate world is incredibly small and contained, while the world outside, the celestial world above, feels infinite. You might find yourself just lying there, looking up at the stars through a gap in the tent flap, losing track of time, mesmerized by the sheer scale of it all. It's a survival situation, yes, but there are moments of unexpected beauty, moments that remind you why people are drawn to places like this, despite the hardships. Though right now you'd trade all those pretty stars for a nice, thick, centrally heated duvet. As the immense star field of Section 10 begins its imperceptible shift, you feel the first subtle changes in the air around you. It's still profoundly dark, maybe even darker than the hours before. The kind of deep blackness that comes just before the dawn. But something is different. The wind, if it had died down, might start to stir again, just a faint whisper. Or the air itself takes on a different density, a stillness that feels heavier, colder. This pre-dawn period, counterintuitively, is often the coldest part of the night. The Earth has been radiating heat all night long without any incoming solar energy, and the atmosphere has finally reached its minimum temperature. You feel it acutely, that final squeeze of cold before the sun makes its appearance. Your body aches in protest. Every joint feels stiff. Every muscle protests against the cold, hard ground, even through whatever meager padding you manage to create. You might curl up tighter, trying to conserve the last scraps of warmth within your coverings. The shivering might return, not the violent shakes from earlier, but a deep internal tremor that feels like it's rattling your bones. Your breath hangs in the air longer, thicker. It's a waiting game, a test of patience as you simply endure this final dip in temperature, knowing that relief is coming, but feeling like it's an eternity away. You might find yourself watching the tiny gap in the tent flap, willing the light to appear, wondering if you could possibly be hallucinating the slow shift from absolute blackness to a faint, almost imperceptible gray on the horizon. There are other signs that dawn is approaching, subtle cues that a survivalist or a nomad who lives by the rhythms of nature would instinctively pick up on. The sounds of the night creatures might change, the nocturnal hunters might be settling down, while the first birds or diurnal insects might begin to stir. A different kind of silence descends, one not of emptiness, but of anticipation, like the world is holding its breath, waiting for the sun. If you listen very carefully, you might hear the faint rustle of things waking up outside your tent, tiny sounds that get lost once the day is fully underway. Inside the tent, as the first hint of diffused light filters through the fabric, there's a shift in energy. Sleep becomes less appealing, replaced by the growing urge to move, to prepare. This is the crucial time for practicalities. Before the sun is even fully up, before the heat becomes a factor, there's work to be done. You start the slow, stiff process of extracting yourself from your sleeping arrangement, rolling up blankets or hides if you have them, shaking sand out of every conceivable fold of fabric, packing away whatever few personal items you possess, a water skin, perhaps a small knife or tool, any remaining rations. Everything must be gathered, secured, and made ready for movement. Even with your hands numb from the cold and your body protesting, you have to be efficient. Every minute you delay now is a minute less you have for travel before the full heat of the day descends. This early morning period is often the prime time for movement in the desert, offering cooler temperatures and softer light for navigation. It's a historical fact that many desert peoples and travelers plan their journeys to take advantage of these cooler hours, often starting before dawn and stopping before the midday sun reached its peak intensity. Think of the old trade caravans, moving under the stars or in the soft glow of pre-dawn. You're participating in that ancient rhythm, though perhaps with slightly less tea and significantly more existential dread. As you fold your sparse bedding, making it as compact as possible, you notice something else: moisture. Despite the dryness of the air overnight, the sudden drop in temperature just before dawn can cause condensation. The inside of the tent fabric might feel damp to the touch, and any exposed metal or even dense fabric surfaces can be covered in a fine dew. This might seem insignificant, but in a place where water is life, even this tiny bit of moisture is noteworthy. Historians still argue whether specific methods for collecting or minimizing condensation were widespread practices among early desert nomads, or if it was simply an accepted part of enduring the environment. Some accounts mention using certain plant fibers or specially treated animal hides to absorb and later squeeze out dew, a testament to the lengths people would go to find even a few drops of water. A quirky or fringe tidbit about this pre-dawn period involves the sounds that can travel in the still, cold air. With the heat distortion of the day absent and the atmospheric layers settled, sound can carry surprisingly far. You might hear faint, distant noises, the call of an animal miles away, or perhaps the creak of equipment from another camp you didn't know was there. There are old tales bordering on folklore of hearing desert drums or strange, resonant sounds carried on the windless air just before sunrise. Phenomena often attributed to seismic activity, geological formations, or even just the vast silence playing tricks on the ears. It's another reminder that the desert, even at its quietest, is never truly empty. The anticipation of the sun is a palpable thing. You crave its warmth, the promise of relief from the biting cold that has permeated everything. You know that the moment the first rays break the horizon, the temperature will begin to climb rapidly, and the world outside the tent will transform. You imagine the feeling of that first warmth on your skin, chasing away the deep chill. It's a simple, primal longing, one that underscores the fundamental nature of your survival. Finding warmth, finding water, finding shelter. Packing up isn't just about efficiency, it's also about minimizing your footprint and ensuring you leave nothing behind that could hinder future travel or attract unwanted attention. Everything you brought in must be either consumed, packed, or reabsorbed by the environment. No litter, no discarded items. This discipline is ingrained in those who live transiently on the land. It's not just about survival, it's about respecting the environment that, despite its harshness, is providing you with a very temporary home. As you secure the last of your belongings, maybe tucking your makeshift shoes back onto your feet, you look towards the horizon again. The gray is lightening now, taking on a yellowish or even pinkish hue just above the line where sand meets sky. The stars are still visible, but their intense blaze is beginning to dim against the encroaching light. It's almost time to face the start of a new day with all its own unique challenges in this vast, unforgiving landscape. You just hope you can still feel your fingers when it's time to take the tent down. The gray light you watched in Section 11 is no longer just a suggestion. It's a full-blown announcement. Suddenly, dramatically, the edge of the world starts to burn. A sliver of intense molten gold appears on the horizon, throwing long, deep shadows across the undulating dunes that were previously swallowed by darkness. Within minutes, that sliver expands into a searing arc, and then, with breathtaking speed, the sun itself crests the horizon. It's not a gentle dawn like you might see in a misty forest. This is a brutal, efficient, desert sunrise. It feels less like the sun is rising and more like it's being ignited just above the sand. The colors explode. Vibrant oranges, fiery reds, dusty pinks, all pushing back the lingering blues and purples of the night sky. And with that instant visual spectacle comes an equally instant physical sensation: warmth. That deep, penetrating cold that seemed to have seeped into your very bones just moments ago begins to recede. The first rays hitting your skin through the tent fabric feel like a blessing, chasing away the pre-dawn chill. But you know this warmth is a double-edged sword. It's relief from the cold, yes, but it's also the herald of the intense, oppressive heat that will soon make any physical exertion incredibly difficult, if not dangerous. This brief window of relatively comfortable temperature, post-sunrise but pre-blazing midday sun, is precious. This is why the tent has to come down, and quickly. Leaving it up will only trap heat inside, turning it into a stifling oven within the hour. Plus, packing a hot, limp tent is significantly harder than wrestling with one that's still cool and has a bit of structure left from the night air. You spring into action, or at least your stiff, aching body attempts to simulate springing. This is the final stage of breaking camp, the most critical before you move. Every movement needs to be focused and efficient. Think of it like packing for a trip where your plane leaves in 15 minutes and everything you own is scattered across your bedroom floor. Except your bedroom floor is made of sand that gets everywhere. You start by addressing the structure. If your tent used poles, perhaps tied together lengths of salvaged material or ingeniously bent branches, you begin to untie or disconnect them. You might need to pull stakes out of the sand, which can be surprisingly difficult if they've settled overnight, or surprisingly easy if the sand is loose, resulting in them just flopping over uselessly, forcing you to dig them out anyway. It's a delicate balance between speed and not bending or breaking your precious structural components. One lost stake or a snapped pole could mean the difference between having shelter tonight and just having a very large, useless blanket. Remember how much effort went into finding or making these pieces? Yeah, don't mess it up now. As the structure is dismantled, the fabric goes limp, collapsing into a heap on the sand. You have to work quickly to fold or roll it before the sun warms it too much, or a sudden gust of wind catches it. This is where the design of some historical nomadic tents was genius. Simple, robust structures that could be erected and dismantled with incredible speed by a coordinated group. Historians still argue whether the speed at which certain nomadic tents could be taken down was primarily driven by the need to outrun storms or simply to maximize travel time during cooler parts of the day. Either way, the principle applies to you. Faster packing means more ground covered before the sun becomes unbearable. You wrestle with the large piece of fabric, trying to get it into a manageable shape. Folding it neatly seems impossible with the wind tugging at it and the sand clinging to everything. Rolling is usually more practical, less precision required, more brute force against the elements. You roll it tightly, trying to expel as much air and sand as possible. Sand will inevitably get in, of course. It's a fundamental law of the universe. Sand plus fabric in the desert, owls forever intertwined. You'll be shaking sand out of this thing for the rest of its and possibly your existence. It's like glitter, but gritty and less festive. Once the tent fabric is rolled or folded, you secure it. Maybe you have ropes, or strips of hide, or just a determined grip. You bundle the poles and stakes alongside it. Everything that formed your home for the night is now reduced to a relatively compact, heavy package. This bundle, along with your other meager possessions, your water skin, your small tool, whatever remains of your rations, constitutes your entire portable life. You might lash it together, creating a single load that you can carry or drag, depending on its weight and your remaining energy levels. A historical fact about Tuareg tents, similar to the kind we're imagining, is that they were traditionally made from animal skins, often goat or camel hide, which offered durability and insulation, or sometimes from woven mats or fabrics. These materials, while effective, could be heavy, emphasizing the need for efficient packing and potentially animal transport, like camels, if available. You, unfortunately, are your own pack animal, so every ounce counts. Imagine trying to fold and carry a tent made of stiff, potentially smelly animal hides every single day. Makes your current situation feel slightly less awful, right? Maybe? Probably not. While you're focused on the physical task, the desert dawn continues its silent show. A quirky or fringe tidbit about sunrise in extremely clear, dry desert air is the possibility of seeing atmospheric phenomena like the green flash. This is a brief optical illusion, usually lasting only a second or two, where a green spot or ray is visible above the upper rim of the sun as it rises or sets. It's caused by the bending of light, refraction, in the atmosphere. You might not consciously look for it, too busy struggling with a rogue tent pole, but the unique quality of the light as the sun clears the horizon might register somewhere in your exhausted brain as just another strange, beautiful, slightly unnerving thing about this place. With the tent down and everything bundled, you take a moment to survey the now empty patch of sand where you slept. It's almost like you were never there, a testament to the nomadic principle of leaving minimal trace. The sun is higher now, its heat already becoming noticeable on your face and arms. The cool, soft light of dawn is fading rapidly, replaced by a harsh, bright glare that signals the coming intensity of the day. You adjust your head covering, pull your bundled belongings into a position you can manage, and take a final look around. The landscape stretches out in every direction, vast and indifferent. The brief respite of night is over. It's time to move. Time to put distance between yourself and the spot where you survived the night, because standing still under the rising sun is no longer an option. Your packed-up life is ready to be carried forward into whatever the day brings. That brutal night, huddled behind a rock, was a pretty effective crash course in why you can't just wing it out here. Survival isn't just about the big things like finding water. It's the relentless, grinding misery of exposure. The sand, the wind, the cold leaching your heat away, it adds up. And the biggest takeaway, screamingly obvious after shivering uncontrollably for 8 hours, is the desperate need for proper shelter. Not a flimsy windbreak, but a dwelling designed to keep the harsh desert environment out. You need something that laughs in the face of sandstorms and sneers at freezing nights. And that brings you back to the experts, doesn't it? The Tuareg nomads, who've been living and thriving in this environment for centuries. They didn't have Gore-Tex or inflatable shelters. They had ingenuity and materials readily available in the desert. Their tents, the aka or ahan as they call them, are legendary for their effectiveness. What were they made of? Well, primarily animal skins. Goat skin was common, sometimes camel hide. Think about that for a second. Animal skins, not brightly colored, lightweight synthetic fabric you can stuff into a compression sack the size of a grapefruit. These were heavy, robust materials. The skins were prepared, tanned and treated, sometimes sewn together in large panels. This wasn't just a quick process. Preparing hides is a skill in itself, turning raw skin into a durable, flexible, and surprisingly effective material. They would also use woven fabrics made from animal hair, like goat or camel hair, sometimes combined with plant fibers if available. These textiles were thick and tightly woven, creating a dense barrier. Why animal skins and hair? Think about the properties. These materials are naturally insulating. They helped keep heat in during the cold nights and, perhaps more importantly, kept the blistering heat out during the day. They're also incredibly durable. Unlike thin modern nylon, a thick hide or densely woven hair fabric can withstand a tremendous amount of abrasion from wind-blown sand. Remember how that fine grit got absolutely everywhere after just one night? These traditional materials were much better at preventing that infiltration. Imagine trying to keep sand out of a lightweight camping tent during a proper desert wind. It would be like trying to filter flour through a colander. These traditional tents were designed to be barriers, thick and heavy enough to stand against the relentless force of the elements. And let's not forget the practicalities for a nomadic lifestyle. These materials were available locally. You didn't need a factory or a complex supply chain. You needed animals, skill in processing the materials, and time. They were also repairable. A tear in a goatskin panel could be patched with another piece of hide and some sinew. A hole in woven fabric could be rewoven. Try patching a rip in a lightweight modern tent during a sandstorm with nothing but what you have on hand. You'd be lucky to make it worse in new and exciting ways. This repairability was crucial for survival over the long term in remote areas. It's the difference between a temporary fix and a sustainable solution. It makes you appreciate the deep, practical knowledge these cultures developed over millennia. It's not just using what you have, It's knowing exactly how to use what you have to maximum effect. Now, while animal skins and hair were primary, sometimes mats woven from reeds or palm fronds were also used, often for walls or flooring, adding another layer of insulation and sandproofing. These were often used in conjunction with the heavier skin or fabric coverings for the roof and main walls. The combination of different natural materials, each with its own strengths, created a surprisingly sophisticated climate-controlled microenvironment inside the tent. Compared to your current strategy of pretend the rock is a hug, it's revolutionary. It's like upgrading from a bicycle with square wheels to a high-speed train. Historians still argue whether the specific choice of goat versus camel hide for different parts of the tent was based purely on availability, or if there were preferred properties for specific uses, like strength for tension areas or flexibility for easy packing. There's definitely a science there, even if it wasn't codified in textbooks back then. Think of it as ancient material science, passed down through generations. A quirky tidbit: some accounts suggest that certain hides might be treated with smoke or specific natural oils, not just for preservation, but potentially to improve their water resistance or even deter insects. Imagine having a tent that smelled faintly of wood smoke and kept the bugs away. That sounds pretty luxurious compared to smelling faintly of desperation and having every insect in the vicinity view you as a potential landlord. The construction wasn't just about the materials, though. The way the panels were sewn together, often with interlocking seams or overlapping sections, added to the wind resistance and prevented sand and rain, rare but possible, from getting in. The dark color of the materials also played a role. While dark colors absorb heat from the sun, the thick insulation prevented much of that heat from penetrating the inside. In the cooler hours, the dark material radiated heat outwards, but the interior remained stable. It's a different logic than the lightweight, reflective materials of many modern tents, which are designed to be airy and dissipate heat quickly. A design philosophy that fails utterly in a sandstorm or a freezing desert night. You realize you need shelter that is heavy, grounded, and creates a sealed environment, not a lightweight, breezy one. Your standard camping tent, bless its little heart, is built for grassy meadows and mild breezes, not the Saharan equivalent of a sandpaper blizzard. Trying to use one here would be like using a sieve to carry water. So the path forward, however daunting, seems clearer. You need shelter built from materials robust enough to defeat the sand and wind and insulating enough to manage the wild temperature swings. You need something that emulates the principles of the Tuareg Eka. Finding animal hides and sinew might be challenging, given your current resources, which are none, but understanding why they use those materials is the first step. It's about replicating function, even if you can't replicate the exact form. Maybe there's a modern equivalent you can scavenge or improvise. Perhaps something less traditional, but equally effective at blocking wind and sand. The sheer durability and density of the traditional materials is the key takeaway. You need something that can take a beating from the environment and keep your fragile human form safe inside. Because another night like the last one, yeah, that's a fast track to not needing any kind of shelter ever again. So you've got the materials, heavy, durable, insulating hides and woven fabrics designed to take a serious beating from the elements. But materials are just part of the equation. You can have the best tent fabric in the world, but if it's not held up correctly, it's just a fancy blanket that the wind will turn into a sail, or worse, a very expensive kite that immediately crashes. The structure, the bones of the Tuareg tent, is just as critical as its skin. And unlike the lightweight, collapsible pole systems of modern tents that practically assemble themselves, these traditional tents required some serious engineering, using materials available in the environment. Think about what holds up a modern tent. Foot-thin, flexible poles made of fiberglass or aluminum alloy that slot together. Very convenient, packs down small. Now think about the desert. Where do you find nice, straight, sturdy poles in a place dominated by sand and scrubby bushes? You don't, not easily. The Tuareg tents, the Akha, typically used a framework of strong, thick poles. These weren't just any sticks. They were carefully selected, often heavier wooden poles, sometimes even composite poles made by binding smaller pieces together for strength and length. The main support often came from a few large, heavy poles, often placed strategically to create the peak or ridge of the tent. These weren't lightweight items you could toss in a backpack. They were substantial pieces of timber or gathered wood, adding to the overall weight and bulk of the camp, but providing essential rigidity. And then there are the ropes. Forget the thin nylon guy lines that come with your average camping tent. Tuareg tents use thick, strong ropes, often made from animal hair, again, or plant fibers, braided for strength. These ropes weren't just for tension, they were structural. They ran from the heavy poles over the fabric roof and were anchored securely to the ground. This system created a robust tension structure that distributed the stress of the wind across the entire tent, rather than concentrating it on a few weak points. Imagine giant spiderwebs of thick cordage, holding everything firmly in place. This complex network of ropes, combined with the weight of the fabric and the strength of the poles, is what allowed these tents to stand firm against winds that would flatten your average dome tent and send its little stakes flying like tiny, suicidal arrows. Anchoring is another area where traditional wisdom shines. Your standard tent stakes are designed for soil, maybe a bit of grass or packed of dirt. They are absolutely useless in loose sand. Try hammering a 6-inch aluminum peg into a dune and watch it disappear faster than your last paycheck. Tuareg tenants used various methods for anchoring, often involving large wooden pegs hammered deep into packed sand or soil if available. But just as frequently, they used heavy stones or bags of sand to weigh down the edges of the tent and the ends of the ropes. The edges of the tent fabric itself often had a skirt or were designed to be weighted down with sand or stones around the perimeter, creating a seal against the ground and preventing sand from blowing underneath. This simple but effective technique is absolutely vital in a sandy environment. It turns the weight of the surrounding sand into part of the anchoring system. Brilliant, really. Turns the enemy into an ally. The process of erecting one of these tents wasn't a 5-minute job like popping up a modern instant tent, which would, for the record, last about 5 seconds in a proper desert gale. It was a significant undertaking, potentially taking an hour or more depending on the size of the tent and the number of people involved. It required coordination, skill, and physical effort. You needed to know exactly where to place the poles, how to run the ropes, and how to achieve the correct tension to make the structure stable. This often involves several people working together, lifting heavy poles, pulling taut ropes, and positioning the massive fabric panels. It was a communal task, a necessary skill passed down through generations. There's a historical fact for you. The successful erection of a Tuareg tent was often a coordinated effort involving multiple family members, highlighting the importance of community and shared skills in their survival strategy. Compared to fumbling with color-coded poles and lightweight fabric in the dark, trying to set up a traditional aka in the desert wind must have been an incredible challenge. You'd need to know exactly which rope went where, how much slack to leave initially, and how to tighten everything down in sequence to create a stable structure that wouldn't immediately collapse on you. The sheer bulk and weight of the materials meant it wasn't something you could do casually. It was a deliberate, skilled process. And imagine doing this day after day as part of a nomadic life. They weren't just setting up camp for a weekend. This was their home, their protection, their most crucial piece of survival gear. A quirky tidbit related to the structure. Some traditions held that specific poles or ropes might have symbolic meanings, or even be oriented in particular directions relative to Mecca or other significant markers, adding a layer of cultural and spiritual significance to the practical act of setting up camp. It wasn't just engineering, it was ritual and tradition woven into the fabric, pun intended, of daily life. Historians still argue whether the precise angles and tensions of the rope system were based purely on empirical knowledge gained over centuries of trial and error, or if there was a more deliberate, almost mathematical understanding of physics involved, even if it wasn't formalized in writing. Was it just instinct and experience? Or was there a deeper, unwritten science at play? Watching the setup of one of these tents, even in historical footage or illustrations, you'd see a practiced dance of lifting, pulling, and securing. The heavy fabric panels, the substantial poles, the thick ropes being stretched and tied off. It's a far cry from the snap-together simplicity of modern camping gear. But that complexity and weight are what gave them their resilience. The structure wasn't designed for ease of transport or minimal weight. It was designed for absolute reliability in the face of hostile conditions. It was built to withstand the kind of wind and sand you just experienced, to create a solid protective shell against the endless, biting environment. You realize that understanding the how of their construction, the heavy poles, the robust ropes, the weighted skirts, the communal effort, is just as important as understanding the what of their materials. It's about building a defense system, not just a portable room. Your little dome tent, even if you had one, wouldn't stand a chance. It's built to shed light rain and provide privacy in a campground. The Aka was built to preserve life in a place trying its best to take it. You need to find a way to replicate that structural integrity, that rootedness to the ground, and that sheer wind resistance using whatever meager resources you might be able to scavenge. It's a stark reminder that survival in extreme environments requires purpose-built tools and deep, practical knowledge, not just optimism and a can-do attitude. And right now, you are critically short on both. So you've processed the materials in your mind, the heavy, wind-deflecting fabrics, the insulating layers, the sheer weight of it all. You've thought about the structure, the substantial poles, the thick braided ropes, the clever anchoring system that turns the surrounding sand into an ally instead of an enemy. You've even considered the communal effort required, the generations of knowledge passed down in the tilt of a pole or the tension of a rope. Now comes the truly disheartening part, because you have to take all that intricate, purpose-built wisdom and try to figure out how you, alone and utterly unprepared in this hostile wasteland, could ever hope to replicate it. It's like watching a master chef prepare an exquisite meal, using exotic ingredients and specialized tools, and then being told you have to recreate it with whatever you can find in a gas station dumpster using only a plastic spork. You've seen the blueprint. The principles are clear enough, but the practical application with your current reality is, well, it's not looking good, Chief. You might understand why they use thick animal hides, but where are you going to find a herd of camels and the expertise to skin and treat them in a way that produces durable, weatherproof fabric? Your best bet is probably trying to stitch together your own skin, and that comes with its own set of problems, mostly involving pain and bleeding. Okay, maybe don't actually try that. Survival tip: keep your skin attached to your body for insulation. You understand the need for sturdy poles, but look around. This isn't a forest. It's sand, scrub, and maybe the occasional really sad-looking rock. Finding wood substantial enough to support a tension structure against gale force winds? Good luck. You might find some dry, brittle branches, good for a sad little fire maybe, but definitely not for holding up your life-saving shelter. You'd probably spend days scouring the landscape, only to come back with a handful of twigs and a sunburn that would make a lobster jealous. It really underscores that survival isn't just about grit, it's about having the right resources available, or the knowledge to create them from the environment. And right now, your environmental resource list seems to start and end with sand and existential dread. Remember the ropes? Thick, braided, strong enough to withstand immense tension. Your shoelaces aren't going to cut it. Maybe you could unravel some fabric, if you had any left after fashioning a pathetic head covering. But even then, you're talking about weaving hundreds of feet of durable cordage by hand. That's a monumental task even with materials, let alone trying to scavenge them. It highlights how integrated the Tuareg survival strategy was with their lifestyle and environment. They had access to animal hair, they had the tools and skills for processing it, they had the communal labor pool for braiding and building. You have a rapidly dwindling supply of hope and maybe a stubborn cactus you could yell at. Let's quickly recap the key lessons these tents teach you purely theoretically, because applying them seems like a distant dream. Lesson 1, Sam: materials matter. You need heavy, wind-resistant, insulating fabrics that won't rip or tear under stress and abrasion. Modern tents are great for weight, terrible for longevity in this kind of environment. So in Lesson 2, structure is key. Forget flimsy poles. You need a robust framework of strong poles and a complex tension network of thick ropes to distribute the load and stand firm. Lesson 3. Anchoring is non-negotiable, especially in sand. You need to weigh down the edges in the ropes, utilizing the environment itself if possible, turning weight into stability. Lesson 4. This isn't a solo job. Building reliable shelter like this often required multiple people working together, combining different skills and physical strength. Trying to adapt this wisdom on the fly with zero preparation is, well, it's probably a losing game. You could try to fashion a pathetic lean-to out of found objects. Maybe use rocks to try and weigh down the edges of a salvaged tarp if you were lucky enough to find one. But replicating the sheer scale and integrity of an Akka, it's almost laughable. The Tuareg knowledge isn't just about what materials to use or how to tie a knot. It's empirical knowledge built over centuries. Historians still argue whether their sophisticated understanding of aerodynamics and structural load-bearing was purely intuitive, passed down through generations of trial and error, or if there was a more deliberate, possibly even spiritual or philosophical dimension to their building practices that contributed to the success of their designs. Was it science, instinct, or something more? A quirky tidbit: within many nomadic cultures, the tent wasn't just shelter, it was deeply symbolic and representing the family unit, their history, and their place in the world. Some tents would even have sections or decorations that were passed down through generations, integrating the past physically into the present home. Imagine trying to imbue your pathetic collection of scavenged debris with that kind of meaning. You'd be lucky if it didn't blow away before you finished tying the first knot. The tent was a living entity, a repository of history and survival wisdom, not just a temporary structure. The mainstream historical fact here is that the ability of nomadic groups like the Tuareg to construct sophisticated, durable, and portable shelters was absolutely fundamental to their survival and way of life in extreme environments. It wasn't a luxury, it was the bedrock of their existence, enabling them to follow migration routes, trade, and sustain themselves where others simply couldn't. Their tents were their mobile fortresses, their protection against the elements and predators, their homes. And your lack of one right now is a stark reminder of how utterly vulnerable you are. Trying to cobble together something based on dimly remembered descriptions is a desperate act, but maybe, just maybe, understanding the principles, the need for weight, tension, and robust materials gives you a slightly better chance than just digging a hole in the sand and hoping for the best. Though honestly, the hole might be less work. Ultimately, the lesson here is profound but demoralizing. True survival in extreme conditions relies on deep, culturally ingrained practical knowledge passed down and refined over vast stretches of time. It's not something you can pick up from a quick YouTube tutorial or a survival guide, especially not one this boring. You needed this knowledge before you were dropped into the situation. You needed the skills, the materials, the community, and the accumulated wisdom of centuries. And you have none of that. You have the biting wind, the endless sand, and a newfound appreciation for just how unprepared you are. You stare out at the swirling grains, thinking about heavy fabrics and strong poles and ropes, and you know that replicating the ingenious simplicity of these ancient shelters is a task far, far beyond your current capabilities. You're on your own, armed only with theoretical knowledge and a rapidly fading memory of what solid ground felt like. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind has finally begun to subside, the sand slowing its relentless dance. The air stills, growing heavy and quiet in the aftermath of the storm. Your muscles ache, your skin feels raw and gritty, but the immediate, violent threat of the gale is passing. There's a stillness now, a vast, empty silence that presses in on you from all sides. The darkness deepens, absolute and starless, swallowing the landscape. You are utterly alone under an indifferent sky, the faint echo of ancient survival strategies whispering just out of reach. Let go of the harsh reality for a moment. Release the tension in your shoulders, unclench your jaw, breathe slowly, deeply. Inhale the fading dust, Exhale the fear. Imagine the silence wrapping around you like a soft blanket. The emptiness a space for rest. There is nothing left to do, nowhere left to run, no storm left to fight. Just the quiet, the calm, the slow descent into stillness. Drift now on the quiet current of the night. Let the images of wind and sand fade, replaced by softness and ease. Sink deeper, heavier. The ground holds you. The air is